You're listening to the Fezcast, the Saracens fans podcast, bringing you the independent and unhinged views of the voices in our heads, as well as those of our special guests. To get in touch with us, find the Fezcast on social media and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube and more. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Well, hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 5 of Fezcast. Now, we've had some feedback from our listeners, all three of them, suggesting that we're getting a little bit too professional on this show. So they've decided to combat that this week by putting me in charge. But don't worry, here to keep me away from all the shiny buttons here at Fezcast Towers, I'm joined by Jez, who's co-hosting, as it were, this week.
Yeah, I feel like a bit like a driving instructor, Barry. You know, I've got me dual controls just in case, and if I hit the dashboard, stop.
I'll certainly do my best, but we've really got a busy show for you this week. So, roughly 4 parts. We will have a chat in part 1 about England coaching changes. And of course, we'll talk about Sarries versus Sale at the weekend. Part 2, we've got a fascinating interview with Mark Thompson, which Duncan and Sam recorded last week. We'll come back then with some very brief reaction to that, and equally brief Chiefs preview. There's no Chiefs input this week, unfortunately. No one was available from their podcast to join us. And then in part 4, we should be joined by Matt, who will take us through all the women's action as we're recording this before the WXV England game, which is on the Sunday evening. So let's get into the England stuff. Joe El Abd joining as a part-time until the end of the season defence coach. But he's also going to be combining that with his work at Oyonnax, which seems a little bit strange, Jez?
Yeah, well, you can coach in France and coach for England, but you can't play in France and play for England.
Yeah.
So it's all a bit arse about it, doesn't it, really?
It does rather, but I don't know a huge amount about Joe. From what I've been reading, he seems to be very much another Steve Borthwick. He's very organised, very methodical, and pays a lot of attention to detail. So he should fit in well. He's obviously replacing Felix Jones, who's off at some point in the next 12 months. We're not entirely sure when yet, but we wish him luck. But there has been late last week, there was 1 or 2 rumours started to surface about our own Phil Morrow being in talks with England. Now, Phil would be a massive loss to Saracens. I mean, we've been fortunate over the years that we've lost other coaches to England, and it's not really made that much of a difference, which is no disrespect to them, but I think it's says more about Saracens and the way we're set up and the ethics and the culture around the club. But make no mistake, Phil would be a massive pair of shoes to fill. He's been with Saracens since 2010, I think now, but isn't it, Jess?
Yeah, I think he has. And I mean, and if you watch the YouTube series, that Phil's been taking very much a more visible role. I mean, you say he's been there since 2010. I mean, how many people would actually be able to point him out in an identity lineup, as it were? I mean, he's one of these guys who's very much in the background. I'm not saying the background, but he doesn't necessarily like the limelight, which I think is one of the strengths of Saracens' coaching setup. Is that, you know, if they need someone to step up, and we'll talk about Rob Webber a bit later on, won't we, Barry? But, you know, like Alex Sanderson did it, like Kelly Brown did it, you know, you've got guys, Dan Vickers does it, who are happy to stand up and be that vocal side of things, while other guys just get on and do the job. But, you know, all these guys speak eloquently. Phil Morrow, I thought, was great. Some of the things he was talking about on that first episode of the Saracens YouTube thing really did impress me a great deal of what he is. And often that's the secret to coaching, isn't it? It's you know, some people think of coaching as being bombarding people with information and being vocal and this, that, and the other. And it's not. The best coaches are the ones who just allow people to do what they do. And I think Phil's very good at that at Saracens. And obviously that's what England has seen, isn't it? And you know, that's what perhaps they want in their organisation.
Yeah, you would think they'd probably seen his work at Saracens and thought he could bring some of that to us. But I mean, he's not just involved in coaching the men's team. Of course, he's involved across the entire organisation, all the sporting side of it, at least. And part of his job is, of course, continuity planning. So hopefully, he's already got his replacement lined up if he is off to England. But time will tell. But on the subject of Saracens, obviously two games into this season and 2 5-point wins, and we currently sit top of the table thanks to Bath not quite being able to get the extra point at the weekend. Jez, what did you make of our performance against Sale?
Well, I think the first thing to say before we talk about the Sale performance is the fact that given the result that Gloucester got against Bristol Bears down at Ashton Gate, it makes that performance look even better because Gloucester actually suddenly, okay, let's sell Bristol back into the game somewhat towards the end. But, we've seen that with Saracens. Teams get a lead and perhaps, change things, whatever. And teams have come back. But, the performance we put against Gloucester, when Gloucester could put that sort of performance in against Bristol, really does, show that actually, for all of what we said, and Brian O'Driscoll would look very sort of like cheesy, very sort of like, what was the word I'm looking for? A bit sort of like sheepish on Saturday on the commentary when he talks about the way that he thought Saracens might not be top four or anything. It doesn't look as if we're actually having that sort of problem anymore, does it, Barry?
No, we certainly started the season well. I mean, there's still plenty of time for things to change in the Premiership. And as we've seen and we've commented on before, it's a very, very tight league these days, and virtually anyone can beat anyone else, as we've seen this week in game week 2. So we'll have to wait and see where we end up. But certainly to be top of the pile after 2 weeks is certainly a good start.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, it does appear that any team can win. And indeed, we've seen Steve Diamond get a bit bullish today, saying that Newcastle definitely won't be bottom of the league come the end of the season. And, I've got a little bit of sympathy for him in that side of thing because, yeah, any team can beat any team. And I think what I've seen, and I put it down on my notes when I was watching the game on the telly, defence seems to have lost its emphasis in this league, Barry, I think. And, we're showing a bit of a blitz defence, and the amount of times that we left gaps that allowed Sale attackers to go through, and they scored a couple of good tries off the back of those as well. But on occasion, we trusted in our scramble. And there was one Rotimi Shegan tackle where he come from his one wing over to the other side to make a tackle after a massive great hole was left. I think it was Nick Tompkins coming out 175 mile an hour, it seems. And, everybody else was chugging along. I think Reece Carey, bless him. I mean, he's never going to be the quickest player off the box in a defensive line, is he? But, it's almost that old Kevin Keegan Newcastle United football philosophy, isn't it? Well, you can score 4 tries, but we'll score 5.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly started the season by trying to play attacking rugby and as you say, trying to outscore our opponents. But let's just delve into the world of social media for a second and look at some of our listeners' 3-word reviews of the game against Sale. So from Kazi, we had Loz can kick. That's certainly true. Fine Wines, spelt Wines. Encouraging, better coming. From Adam, we had Tobias Future Star, and that's also a very good point that we'll come on to. Yar Boomy suggested Goody sheer class, and he certainly added another level to our game when he came on at the end. Sam Norris, whoever he is, more to give. I'm not sure if he's talking about Saracens there or himself and his appearances on the Fezcast, but we'll see. Nigel Jordan Barber, what a pass, obviously referring to Alex Lazowski's left-handed, what are we calling that, 25-metre pass out to Tobias Elliott for his try. Saracen 1971, traffic cone kit. I think that's a little bit harsh from Sale, but there we go. Ben Hooksma, and I probably pronounced that incorrectly, so apologies for that. Still managing expectations. And from Hairbrain, we had Fizzy Fuzzy, Find a Way, Fantastic. I'm not sure that's a review. Perhaps that's a cocktail, but I'll certainly have one of those if Harebrain's buying. So what did you make of those, Jez?
Oh yeah, I mean, I put a post up as well. I said 5 points, baby, and at the end of the day, that's what it was. It was 5 points, and excellent stuff. There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on there. First off, was it Kazi Sarries saying Alex can kick? Yes, he can, and I think it was brought up in commentary by the guys on comms, Flats and Austin Healy and Nick Mullins, that saying the week before, Fergusberg did have a disaster off of the tee, but he wasn't great. So Alex Lozowski steps up, apparently at quite short notice if these man of the match interviews anything to go by afterwards. But took some pressure off Fergusberg, which I think is great. That's brilliant, fantastic, very clever management. Someone's just turned around to Fergus and said, right, off you go, just play standoff and do that, and don't worry about the rest of it. You've got a senior player like Alex Lozowski, and I mean, he came in for some criticism in pre-season from some quarters. He's responded to that and has become a very important player in that side. Whether that's because he's looking at our friend Cinti out here, player for Argentina, and thinking, "Oh, I best perform to make it hard for him to come back into the side," or what, I don't know. But that kicking, he added something, and we didn't leave too many points out on the field, unlike the week before, and that's a really good sign. And I think it also has enabled Fergusberg to really settle down and play standoff. And there were a couple of glimpses of Fergus's play in looking at gaps and going into gaps that that really are very promising in the way that we are obviously trying to evolve the play, Barry.
Yeah, he's Fergus has got a cracking running style when he gets going, and he seems to be able to sniff out a gap and go through it quite easily. And there's definitely more to come from Fergus. But you're right about the kicking. It's something that Loz has always been able to offer Saracens, and we've used him previously lots of occasions to do some kicking for various reasons. The only slight concern I have with it is that it becomes a bit too much of a thing, and we end up doing it permanently, and that kind of dents Fergus's confidence a little bit. But not a problem at the moment. We'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But now, I watched the game back last night with a gin and tonic, which is probably the best way to watch it, having seen it live as well. Gave me a different perspective on it. I thought the referee did okay, but I don't think you were quite as keen on him yesterday, were you, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, in the heat of the moment, and watching the game live, perhaps in our little Fezcast WhatsApp chat, I was maybe a little bit harsh. I don't think he had a great game. And I mean, if you see the games that Luke Pearce has refereed recently, you see there is a golfing class between the very best and the rest. But that's the same in anything, isn't it? There's a golfing class between the very best players and the rest. And, the lad's going to learn from it. I hope that he sits back and looks at a couple of things. I was surprised it wasn't a red for the hit on Ben Earl. I saw very little mitigation there. Ben Earl wasn't appreciably dipping, and the lad came through, and they said, oh, he wasn't going forward with any force. Well, he stood his ground, and that's enough force normally. And I think he was perhaps lucky that the only slight mitigation was the initial contact was top of the shoulder and then into the head. But if that had been given as a red, I don't think anybody either side would have had any complaints and shouldn't have had any complaints. So I had a concern there, and there was a few moments, in particular at scrum time, that really annoyed me. That there was a young lad scrummaging for Saudi, who did a good job, fair dues. But Reece Carey is an absolute monster, and Reece got penalised a couple of times for stepping round, and they were pulling it out on commentary as well, saying he's stepping round. The reason he was stepping round was because he'd monstered his opposite number. And the opposite number couldn't cope with the power that's coming through and was stepping backwards and inwards, which meant that Reece Carey's only way he could go, if he was trying to go forwards, he was forced, because of the way the prop was coming through against him, that he went and stepped around. So the initial penalty was against the Sale prop. And, David Flatman should have known that, and I'm a little bit concerned why he wasn't calling it in the way that I was calling it. And woe betide me to say I'm a better reader of props than David Flatman, but there was an awful lot of that. That's a young English prop. We've got to give him the benefit, shall we say? And I'm not entirely concerned. The referee didn't give him the benefit too.
Yeah, I think he probably did get the benefit of the doubt a couple of times. It's probably it will sound a slightly strange thing to say, but Reece Carre wearing white boots probably makes it stand out more that he's doing something slightly different, because they are a different colour to everyone else's, and they're more noticeable. And I wonder if that's something that he'll maybe think about in the future. But yeah, it's just nice to have a flipping scrum that's actually competitive for once, isn't it? I mean, we seem to have put last season's scrum woes firmly behind us so far.
Well, we have indeed. I mean, I think there was the one scrum towards the end of the game where they just, and I think we changed our front row by then, and Sam Crean had come on, and just absolutely mullered the opposition and drove them off, and it was frightening to see. That last year, that was us under that sort of caution. I mean, Sale are a good scrubbage inside, got some big, strong boys in there. And they brought on a tight head who just had an awful afternoon, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You do have to acknowledge Sale's injury woes, though. They were probably one more injury away from Alexander than himself coming on to finish the game. But you've got a note here about Mauro Itoje. Now, I had actually disappeared off at half-time to go to the loo and get a pint. And by the time I got back in my seat, Itoje was literally walking off the field. So I've watched it back on television. I can't quite work out what actually happened with him, but it was sort of 46 seconds into the second half. So it was definitely an injury rather than tactical by the looks of it.
Well, they said it was tactical, didn't they? But yeah, no, he had ice on his knee. And I think perhaps there was an element of precaution involved in it. And actually, Theo McFarlane coming on, whatever, it doesn't really take anything too much away from it, does it? It was good. And Nick Ezekwe as well, obviously. I mean, and actually, I think Nick Ezekwe really did put himself about a bit. Mauro wasn't the best second row on the field in the game. Hugh Tizard had an absolutely outstanding game, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Hugh has had two very good games for us this season. Yesterday, of course, the weekend was his 50th appearance for Saracens, so good for him to mark that occasion with another top performance. But yeah, I thought we did very well, and yes, I know what you mean. If you Sale and you say, oh, thank God for that, we've got rid of Mauro Itoje, who are they bringing on next? And you look up and it's Theo McFarlane, you're probably going, oh, actually, yeah. Is it too late to bring Mauro back?
Yeah, it is. And I think that's another thing that has really gone well this season, that where perhaps, last season it wasn't bad by any stretch of imagination, but our line-out seems to have stepped up appreciably. And I think we mentioned him already. Rob Webber's come in and made a difference there, hasn't he, Barry?
Yeah, definitely. It's the scrum and the line-out has been better. A lot of our players have been better this season, and with the set piece, we will get faster ball from rucks, and Ivan Van Zyl will really come into his own. I mean, he's already scored a cracking try away at Gloucester, but he had another good game at the weekend, and backed up again superbly by Charlie Bracken, who just comes on and looks like he's been playing Premiership rugby forever.
Well, yeah, and I really wanted to pull Charlie out for some special mention, because the fourth try that we scored deep into time added on at the end of the game, as it were, he really showed a maturity, I think, which is fantastic to see. When you've got players like Gareth, who's out injured, you'd expect to be ahead of Charlie. You brought in the lad to cover the injuries and everything, and Charlie's there. And what it was is that we had that line out. We've gone for the drive over. Then it's been sacked down, whatever, and we were just picking up. And you've got a lot of really powerful forwards, some very vocal forwards, some very experienced forwards. Be very easy for Charlie Bracken to let them just do what they wanted to do and continue. But he saw something on, And he wasn't afraid to go, no, it's backs time now. We've got the overlap. They're down a man. We've dragged everybody in. Let's go wide. And, a lesser man, a lesser scrum half, a lesser mature scrum half. And, how old is he? 20 years old? He's not very old at all. There was that, and he'll hate this, I'm sure. And I think it was a funny bit of commentary as well from Austin Healey, where he was talking about who's Charlie Bracken's favourite scrum half, and Austin said, "Oh, sure, it's his dad." And Nick Munn said, "No, it's Ben Youngs." He said, "Oh, he could have said Matt Dawson or Andy Gobersall. That would have killed his dad," which I thought was hilarious. But no, what he did. And to compare Charlie to his dad's really, really unfair. But, his dad was very good at taking control of situations. And when it was on going, and Charlie did exactly the same. And that, it was a case of, right, it's a 25-yard pass I'm going to put out here to a standoff, but I'm going to do it. And, we're not going to lose the game. But there's that bit of moment of clarity, shall we say, that gave us that extra bonus point, which Bath didn't get today, for argument's sake,
No, I think, and I hope Charlie probably realised, I think we just got penalty advantage just before before he threw that pass out. So it was a bit of a free play, if my memory serves me correctly. But no, it was great to see. We'd almost got over the line before that. But an extra 5 minutes in the game was always enjoyable. But there we are. So I think that covers pretty much all the Saracens stuff, apart from, of course, Alex Lazowski. We will have to come back to him. Live at the Stonex, I thought Elliot Daly had a cracking game. I know he did make one mistake, letting the ball bounce, which led to Sale's first try. But what a performance by Loz, as you've said, and absolutely superb. Took the kicking duties away, played brilliantly all game, I thought, and he nearly caught an interception with his teeth at one point as well. If he'd held on to that, he was in under the sticks.
Yeah, he was an absolutely superb game, and because of him, other players were able to play around him. And again, the two wingers, Rotimi Shegan, he, for a bloke who's 5'1" in his stocking feet, he don't half get up. And when you've got Ivan Van Zyl putting box kicks onto sixpence, he made the back three for Sale have an absolute nightmare of an afternoon at occasions. And then you got the other young lad on the wing, Tobias Elliott. And I said it on our WhatsApp group. I don't think I've seen as good a finisher in a Saracen shirt from the wing. And I mean, this is huge considering the likes of David Strettle and Alex Lewington and whatever. But he's the best finisher on two examples I've seen since Chris Ashton was in a black shirt. And I mean, that's a huge call. It is a huge call just on 2 tries. But I'm seeing the potential that obviously the coaching staff are seeing as well. Yes, he's got to work on his defence a little bit, but in attack, boy, he can move, and boy, he knows how to finish.
Yeah, defence is something for a winger. It can be coached, certainly in terms of positioning, so long as he listens to the coaches and takes on board what they're saying. But yeah, his finishing is outstanding. He had no right to score either of the tries that he's picked up for us this season. And I mean, as good as the pass was that set him up for it, he still had to beat 2 men, and he still had quite a lot of distance to cover to do it. So another one of our young players who's had a wonderful beginning to the season, and long may it continue.
Well, yeah, I mean, you only have to compare taking the ball at that pace and that hard a pass, because that pass was thrown a long distance, it was travelling. To take it at that pace was impressive. But then when you compare it to Tom O'Flaherty butchering one at the other end, which was very, very similar, and this is Tom O'Flaherty's got multitude more performances under his belt at this level than Tobias has. That shows something, it may be playing with the lack of fear that comes with being a kid, as it were. But I mean, yeah, it's a total difference, wasn't it? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, O'Flaherty's always been a thorn in our side. When he was at Exeter as well, he was always a player that we would try and keep a lid on, because once he gets going, he's very, very hard to stop. But if he doesn't catch the ball, he can't possibly get going.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. The last thing I wanted to quickly say was just Fergus Burke. Obviously, what do we think about the potential that he's actually Fergus McBurke? Do you think he'll be in the Scotland setup come November?
Well, I mean, he's come to Saracens to escape the shadow of one great number 10, and is he really going to want to go and sit behind another one in Scotland? I don't know. I'm sure both Scotland and England have possibly even, chatted to him and found out if there's any interest or which way his interest would lie if it comes to it. But interesting thought. But I think I'd rather see him concentrate on his Saracens future for a while at least. Yeah,
we'll lock him away, take his mobile phone off of him, and give Gregor Townsend James Burke's number, shall we, or what?
Yeah, we'll definitely give him someone else's number. Right. Well, now on to part 2 of the show, which is a fascinating chat that Duncan and Sam had with Mark Thompson, Sarries CEO. Now, this is the 3rd time that Mark has joined us on the Fezcast, and he's always very generous with his time and always very keen to come and chat to us. But we'll cue that up for you now. Now, this was recorded before the sale result, as Duncan will tell you at the beginning. So sit back and enjoy the chat with Duncan and Sam with Mark Thompson.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Well, we're here with Mark Thompson. Thank you very much, Mark, for making some time for us, in which I bet is a busy week pending the important arrival in your life next week. We're very honoured to speak to you. You should be very honoured because we've also got Sam here, and he normally can't be asked to turn up.
That's not true. I've already made an appearance this season, so I think I've hit my target for last season already.
I think you've doubled it.
No, good to be here.
Mark, we're speaking on the Monday afternoon following a Saturday at Gloucester. What a great start to the season.
Yeah, it was great. I was lucky enough to be there. Really good performance first up from the team. Speaking to Phil Morrow on Sunday, and he's like, the coach has got their analysis like spot on. We really turned up. Good mixture of experience and youth. Great little debut try for Tobias Elliott. All in all, really great. 5 points away from home. Wonderful start to the season. Everyone's very happy.
And looking at the fan reaction, it seems to be very much the feeling that it's a new era with a new impetus. And that's what came across to me.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about it a bit. Some of you to watch the content series that came out on Friday. We've spoken a lot internally and externally about this new era, but also the blend rather than just being you don't win anything with kids type 1993 Man United approach, even though they then did win it. So we would more than happily take that. But I think right from the start of pre-season, everyone's been really, really energetic and enthused about what's going on and where we're at as a group and the bonds that are forming, and marrying that experience with some of our experienced internationals with the huge crop of talent we've got coming out. So, there's going to be ups and downs this season, but we feel in a very good place.
It was a really good start and great to see. And I'm imagining it's going to sell some tickets for sale on Saturday. There's been good and bad news on that. The renewal rate on the season tickets was great. The new season ticket sales are less so. But the showdown is flying despite putting the higher priced tickets up. It looks like the showdown financially and in terms of a marketing tool is just becoming more and more important.
Yes, we are. We're comfortably ahead at the moment. I'm reluctant to say that because obviously the PR spinners, we want people to buy and all of that, and of course we do. But we're in a really good place on Showdown. I think that as a fixture within both the rugby and the London sporting community is becoming quite well established now. Last year we made double the profit on that game that we did 2 years prior to that. Our projections with that is that goes up another 5-6% because largely we pretty much sold out last year, not quite. So we feel in a very good place with that. We're in a slightly more challenging place, actually, being very open on season ticket sales. We'd actually gone down year on year for 4 or 5 years beforehand. We're not alone in rugby in that position, but we are in that position. So we faced a bit of a short-term challenge there that we're hoping to make up from a match perspective. So we're in an okay position, but there's work to be done inside the club to continue to build on that.
Just picking up the feedback from around fans again, I think the biggest challenge is the reduction in the size of the league. People feel if they miss one or two games, it's starting to become a bit expensive.
Yes, that's a fair comment. I think we've shown a flexibility as a club in terms of including other matches in it, but yeah, no doubt there's a challenge here whereby if you can't make certain fixtures and that your decision making criteria becomes a bit more stringent than it was. So that we think we still offer a great product at great value, a great match day experience value in the membership proposition, everything that you would expect a CEO here to come on board and say, and I do say that and I do believe in it. But there's no getting away from the fact there are short-term challenges around rugby about creating that coherent narrative across TV channels and all of that ultimately do impact discretionary spend and how much you feel you need to go and purchase that season ticket. So we're working really, really hard to continue to deliver something that we think is of value. But yeah.
To what extent do you think profile is an issue? I mean, both of us have worked for provincial football clubs where you are the biggest story in town. You're on the local radio, you're on the local TV, local paper every day, which is probably similar to running Northampton Saints or Exeter or Gloucester or Bath. But Saracens is very much in the shadow of two monster Premier League football clubs, let alone the rest of the Premier League.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I came from Burnley Football Club where, we were the height of the thing in town. We spend a lot of time thinking about audiences. To what degree, when you're spending finite time and money chasing them, is it kind of getting the rugby fan who lives in central London to come to club rugby when perhaps they go to Twickenham once a year and don't have a club team, versus looking closer to home in North London, but potentially trying to persuade the person who doesn't really understand rugby and the nuances of it to come, and that trade-off, because you can't do everything and you've got to kind of pick a messaging. So it's an opportunity, it's a challenge. We're going to be a lot more aggressive this year in our outbound communications. I think some of the interviews that you've probably seen that have quoted people like myself over the last couple of weeks are the starting point to us trying to be a lot more out there, even where you're then talking about balanced things that include negative elements, but just being really authentic and really honest about it. So it's a challenge, it's an opportunity, but we feel confident that we're heading in the right direction structurally, even if our numbers right now don't point to that in a weird way.
We were discussing this on our little WhatsApp group, weren't we, about kind of should we call it the Wrexhamification of sports clubs? And I think I might have coined a phrase there actually, but there was a graphic that was shared on Twitter about the different clubs and different followings that they have on various different social media platforms, and it was quite interesting to see kind of where we were. We were kind of mid-table on a lot of things. We've obviously just had the first episode of the great new show that you guys are putting out, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I guess I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about where you felt, Saracens sort of fit in this new era of sports clubs, where actually having a bum on a seat at the Stonex on a Saturday, is that as important? And where on a leveler is that to somebody that maybe lives in another country that then supports Saracens because they follow us on social media, they love the characters that we've got, and they spend a few £100 every now and again in an online club shop?
Well, they're spending a couple of £100 a few times. They're a very, very highly priced retail customer. So more of them, please. It's really interesting. I kind of got misquoted until the quote got removed last week in a City AM, where someone talked about the fact that a Gloucester podcast was paraphrasing that I had said that ticket sales weren't important, when actually that was a total incorrect quote, and I got the quote removed. The reality actually is that matchday revenues are more important as a proportion of total revenues for rugby club than pretty much any other league. Like, our broadcast deal is significant, but actually we make more money from people attending games. This isn't the English Premier League. So that focus on creating a good matchday experience, not only because it helps us win and, it's really important to the fabric of the club, like from a financial perspective, won't decrease, because it is arguably the most important thing as well in that regards. Content's a really interesting one. I had this chat with actually Maro. I was spending time with him before the Big Bash that we did a few weeks ago, and we were talking actually about documentaries and content. We were talking in the context of like, if you were to do something with Harlequins and Saracens, club-wide, men's and women's, what would the narrative be? And I think there's a really interesting conversation around like who would be the buyer, like ultimately who would pay for that? Because if I want to tell the story about Marley Packer, the BBC are really interested in that because they're hosting the Women's World Cup, but actually TNT will be to a degree because PWR is shown on there, but Premier Sports Network won't. If I want to tell the story about our men's rebirth and focus on Mario Itoje, well, the BBC aren't interested because they're not showing the Six Nations, they're not showing domestic rugby or European rugby. So I guess one of the challenges with the fragmentation of rights is knowing who then the buyer is, because ultimately they're trying to build off of that engagement to sell or retain them on something else, and something else that features and profits from that enhanced interest in the athlete or clubs. So I think that's the biggest challenge that rugby clubs face is, do you have something that is so compelling that Amazon are going to offer you £10 million a year like they would Man City? Not really at the moment. But then secondly, like within the context of the load of stories we really do have, who ultimately is going to see the greatest value in that story that they're going to willing to pay to make the documentary or long form piece of content make sense. But we're really proud with what we released last Friday. I think it's really interesting. Like, we know the hardcore Saracens fans will love it. I think the challenge for us moving forward will be how do you keep that, both in terms of the fabric of the club and what we're saying about us that's different, but also, you know, you guys will love Dan and Charlie and Ivan coming on repeatedly talking about our culture. How also do we, that's great content, how also do we make sure that people who aren't rugby fans or aren't Saracens fans like it as much? Because that's when the magic really happens, right? So that's a really, really exciting opportunity for us to think through.
But I suppose by releasing that series yourself, I guess you control the narrative of that, and I suppose you also then get the immediate feedback as well, which is maybe one of the reasons why it's so important to to build the marketing team at Saracens the way that we are seemingly at the moment. We discussed it ourselves, how the quality of the marketing internally has just gone through the roof over the last year or so, which is just really exciting for us as fans to see.
Wow, shout out Emily Wiles if she's listening to this podcast. It's actually, if Emily listens to this, I'll ask her to follow up. So it'll be a good test whether she's listening to this podcast, but that's very nice of you to say. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. The Man City documentary that was on Netflix, I don't know if you watched it. It's one of my ex-clubs, but I think that worked really, really well because you could see the level of comfort the players had with the people behind the camera because it was an in-house production. So it's always a challenge because recruiting the volume and quality of people that can deliver like really compelling long form content and the return you get around that in the short term as well as the long term. But we're delighted that the work that Ryan and the team have done around that authenticity and the comfort that the players have matters with them. And so now we've got to kind of work hard on having the conversations with the third party distributors to be like, what do you like? What's gonna stay? What's gonna stick with audiences that are sports interested, rugby interested, and actually like lean in and shape and cultivate and cut and tailor all of that so that it fits different audiences in different ways. So it's the fun stuff, but I think we've made a good start.
The challenge, as I think you said, is always to stand out, isn't it? There's an incredible narrative if it can be recreated around being relegated, COVID coming along, almost being doomed to obscurity forever, as we watched online as we lost against Pirates, coming back, nearly winning. If you could recreate that, there's an amazing story.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about, I was chatting to the CEO of Stonex, and their first game on the front of shirt and as stadium sponsors was crouched around a laptop watching us lose down in Cornwall. And they often joke about, the thoughts that were running through their mind at that point. But, their renewal is a testimony to the story, essentially, and the story that they've been a big part of as a corporate partner with us.
I just bought a double season ticket and that was bad enough. I can't imagine what they were thinking.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, there's Look, it's funny because we're telling the story of the new era, and to some degree, we all know what we're talking about here, right? We've lost a lot of players who have been integral to the fabric of Saracens, the Alex Lewingtons, the Sean Maitlands, obviously some who are slightly more high profile, Billy, Mako, and going all the way up to Owen. But actually, externally, when we talk about a new era, we're still talking about a team that hardly had a fit back three at the end of last season and lost by 2 points in the semi-final to the eventual champion. We have the England captain, we have Maro, we have the England player of the year. It's funny enough, when you actually chat to people who aren't really, really close to the rugby community, that they don't, outside of Owen, they don't necessarily automatically notice a difference. So, like, whilst we talk about this new era internally, we also have to be conscious that also what we're selling, whether it's season tickets or broadcasters, is like, the spine of our team and pack is stars.
I suppose that was sort of spoken about a little bit on the first of the documentary series, about that continuation, about the bringing in. There's certainly a Saracens way, and some of the new players, like Charlie Bracken was mentioning, he's learnt that a little bit from his dad. So I guess we're, as a club, it is a new era, but it's a new era based on a lot of tradition and a lot of a certain way of going about doing things, which I think certainly come across on that particular documentary. And I think as fans, we feel that too.
Yeah, and we've got so many great touch points, right? So the Brackens are an obvious one, and have been spoken about a lot, about their links, not just with Kieran, but Charlie's grandfather's on the board here, and his aunt is the head of hospitality account management. But it's not just that. We had a number of people. We had a number of young kids training with us in those first few weeks of pre-season, one of whom is Phil Morrow's son, who's in the England under-18 team. So we've got. I went to the GCSE results day of the high school with Nathan, who had just come back from playing number 8 in the under-20s World Cup winning team, and so all the different touch points of people being bedded in proactively into what makes us a really great family. You kind of see it happening in real time. I went to the opening of Saracens Bell Lane Primary School with Sam Spink, so who's on his way back from injury, having joined the club from Wasps via the Western Force. So you see the conversations that happen at the training ground when people once or twice a week are standing up telling their story, and people are getting very, very open about like their history, their past, what it means to them, those who have been at Saracens a while, what Saracens mean to them, on the new players, what they care about the job. It's like you see it on the men's side, you see it on the women's side. I've got to know a lot of the women's team really well, in terms of some of them are out there representing their countries at WXV at the moment. Some of them are doing 9-to-5 jobs in really, really tough 9-to-5 jobs, and then coming up and being elite athletes at 5 p.m. and talking to them about what being a rugby player and what being in a team environment means for them. So it's really, really great place to be.
Living locally to Stonex, I love seeing the kids walking around in their Saracens uniform. It's just absolutely brilliant. And the other thing really exciting right now is that it really feels like there's a crop of great youngsters about to come through. We've had obviously, a few breakthroughs, Ollie Hartley, Theo Dan in recent years, but it feels like there's a real wave of them right now.
Yeah, look, statistically, we've never had as great a representation at England junior levels at the 18s and 20s. I mean that's the statistic. Now, not every England under 18 player ends up leading a team to a Premiership rugby title, but it helps to have a lot of them in the pipeline. So that crop will obviously take a while to come through, but actually that energy, even in the short term, impacts the way we train. When you see some of the records that these kids are breaking in the pre-season fitness tests, that kind of inspires everyone up to an Alex Good, right? So yeah, we just feel really comfortable. I mean, again, it's my first pre-season, first full season. So to some degree, it's very difficult for me to be the one to tell this story. But even when I speak to journalists who, have interviewed Mark over the last 2 weeks, they say, just the enthusiasm and the energy is there. But as I say, every club says that to a degree, right? Until they start losing matches. But it's a nice place to be, this club.
And apologies for that. I'll just stop and deal with that.
There we go. So it's what happens when you get someone like Duncan who's so busy and important, taking over. I don't even know if he's actually. Did you actually stop the recording, Duncan?
I didn't. No, I'm just. There you go. There's my camera again. Yeah, sorry about that.
It's like come for the highlights about Saracens, stay for Sam talking about how important Duncan is.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he is right. He is right.
Yeah, I am. I'm very open about it.
There's a lot of financial challenges for rugby at the moment. Is that what's driving the stories coming out about possible mergers with the URC?
Yeah, I mean, financial sustainability clearly is one important driver of why you would ever look at your business and consider whether you should be another business. Very openly, I don't think you'd be breaking confidence to say that, of course, there have been conversations way predating me about existing competition structures. We're already renewing it. I think it's important to keep in perspective that PRL actually had a really good year last year. I mean, for all the talk of what could or couldn't happen in the next 5 years about European structure, about domestic and European structures, like PRL had a really good year last year. The quality on the pitch is very good. Final sold out quicker. Our match against Tottenham. No, that would have been an interesting crossover. Our match against Harlequins at Tottenham broke a number of domestic TV records for similar types of rugby games. So we're actually not in a bad place. But of course, it was only inevitable. But the conversations would and will happen when you have complementary rugby products in geographic markets that are very, very adjacent. So what that does or doesn't mean in the next 3, 5, 10 years is very much TBC. But conversations will be had, of course, around that. And how do you create a compelling product that fans love, that broadcasters want and will go to bat for? So it's exciting to think through these.
I think you're absolutely right. The product on the pitch, in terms of the Premiership, hasn't been better, I don't think. Yep. The style that teams are playing, and in that respect, the going down to 10 teams has concentrated the talent and made it better. You at the SSA AGM, you talked about getting more out of Stonex. Do you want to give us an idea of some of the ideas you have there?
The company or the stadium?
The stadium. You may be able to tell us how you're going to get more out of the Stonex, the company, but I was thinking of the stadium.
Probably need to sign an NDA for that.
If it was Stonex, the company, I wouldn't say getting out, but they've been very, very generous in their commitment, and there'll be a couple of things that they are continuing to commit to that will come out over time that reinforce the value they see in the club, but also, frankly, the value that they bring to the club. Around the stadium, look, I think there's a really interesting conversation. A lot of sports companies now, if not becoming sports real estate companies, are always like looking and entertaining that. And 3-5 years ago, the conversation was, how do we become a 365-day venue? It was a very replicated, easily used phrase. That all still is true. Even though to some degree, when you look at the proportion of our current P&L, the non-business match day is relatively small. We have significant community commitments that we're more than happy with, but that were a precondition of the stadium being, which means you are somewhat restricted. You're somewhat restricted in your licensing of how many big events you can hold. So that will take us someplace, and we'll have some announcements over the next month that are good on that front. Then there's a broader conversation around like working with the council. How can we actually make this a really great leisure and well-being hub? We have a role to play in that. The council have a role to be in that. And there are elements of that is like, what is our long-term training solution? What would that mean for both directly businesses' appetites to come here, whether to use the facility directly or as a growing hub that I reference? So that's all in the early stages. So we don't really have anything material to announce, but clearly a proportion of my job over the next 12 months is fleshing out some of the opportunities here and working with the different stakeholders, from owners to council to potential partners, to see where we can unlock financial and strategic value against. It's a very shareholdery comment by me, but I did have some form of corporate background, so.
Well, creating new businesses is the hardest game in business, I think. So good luck with that.
Yeah.
Sam, do you want to take the last question?
Yeah, so it's quite a good segue into that, really. And this is a question I think has been asked of sports teams for a long, long time, but it'd be great to get your thoughts on this, Mark, as somebody that obviously does have a corporate background. Is, how different is running the business of Saracens to the business of a normal trading company? Because obviously you've got the element of a customer, in inverted commas, but obviously I guess you've got to treat them a little bit differently, or is there some sort of crossover that you've learned from that corporate background that sort of does marry quite well with running a business like Saracens?
It's funny, like everyone gets stuck up on the fan customer. I do think they're the same thing. Ultimately, any customer is why people get stuck up is because the values that customer places on in a rugby stand, watching a rugby club or sports club is different from a normal business. The switching costs are different, but still fundamentally you're trying to deliver a product and service that they value, right? And your job it is to just understand and appreciate what they value, and then how they go about conscious and unconscious decision making and biases within that relate to that. I actually think rugby is a lot more structured, where it's similar to corporates than football is. Football is a very, very highly emotional, deep-rooted, irrational way of viewing everything that happens against the club. I think rugby, it's a lot more, certainly, and I say this as a positive thing, in my 8-9 months here, like I've had a lot of really great conversations with people who understand both sides of the argument on certain things. It's not a one-sided argument that previously I feel I've had at sports organizations. So I actually don't think there's a huge difference when I think of my day-to-day at Saracens. If I was waking up right now thinking about the day, how we interact with staff, what decisions we're making and the processes we're going through, and how we do or don't entertain fan input into that, I actually don't think it's too dissimilar. I think the big difference actually is that sports organizations have outsized brands versus actually what we are. We are not even a big SME, actually, when it comes to employers. So often people will, at the detriment to sports teams, compare how it might run at Saracens versus how it runs at Microsoft. In reality, like, we're not the size of a Microsoft. We don't have the processes, which allows us to move quicker. But actually, then you can get hung up on judging yourselves negatively against that. So it's a great question, and my answer would be I don't think it's fundamentally that different, especially when you deal with rational fans, which up to this point I have been very pleasantly surprised with how rational everyone I've spoken to.
You clearly haven't sat next to any of us at a game.
Well, I could name check a few people in the Saracens fan base. I'm just getting to that point where I know not just faces but names, and have had conversations with names where I feel I'm like 3 months off where we can have a really funny, informal conversation about different members that will listen to every episode of this, but in a very positive, loving way, about knowing what their nuances are. And I'm really glad that quite quickly I've actually feel like I've reached that point. So, and I appreciate all the interactions I have.
Well, you'll have to give me tips on how to remember people's names. I'm famous for not doing it, John. That would be good. Thanks very much for giving us your time. I hope it's been a little bit of light relief, and very much hope we'll be speaking to you again at the right time.
Wonderful. Thanks as always.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
You are listening to the Fezcast, which is proudly sponsored by the Saracens Supporters Association, and I'm Alison Davis, one of the SSA committee. For a £10 annual subscription, the SSA provides our members with monthly newsletters, virtual and in-person player events, away match ticket allocations, and we organise pre-match gatherings at away matches. We sponsor men's and women's players, and we support the Saracens Foundation Track Club on behalf of our members. On top of all that, every year we have a seasonal SSA badge, which is exclusive to members. Where else can you get that much value for a tenner? Join now at membermojo.co.uk/SSA, or come and see us on match day in the Oasis at the Stonex.
This is the Fezcast.
Right, so a fascinating chat there between Duncan, Sam, and Saracens CEO Mark Thompson. Some interesting points coming out of it, particularly around the good energy that they've had all through pre-season, and that certainly seems to have carried into the season, doesn't it, Jez, in the first couple of weeks?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think actually, I mean, the one thing to say from the point of view of the Fezcast, but also I think on the point of view of the fans, is that Mark is. I like the bloke. I really do like the bloke. I think he's got an energy himself that has been infectious throughout the club, and I think it's perhaps that injection that's needed. And it's simple things that they're doing. And I think Mark will be the first person to say it. He'll not get it right every time, first time. And nobody should expect it. But I think they're coming from the right direction with the right thoughts in heart. And they're doing an awful lot of things right. Simple things. Back in black. Coming out to the field to back in black. What a fantastic thing to do. I know they've done the whole thing about nicking the idea about the announcers calling out the Christian name of the player and the crowd calling out the surname, which is all well and good, provided you got surnames that people can pronounce. I would just keep very quiet at that point if I was in the crowd. I know. I see on the WhatsApp group I put in a team of a legends team, as it were. Thomas Cash, Abdelief. It would be an absolute nightmare, wouldn't it? But I mean, yeah, but those sort of things, people come to Saracens and say, "Oh, there's no atmosphere. It's prawn sandwiches, this, that, and everything." But they're doing everything they can to invigorate the club, invigorate the spectators, invigorate the players. And you're right, it seems to be working, Barry, and all power to them.
Yeah, I don't quite get the little gripes that you see occasionally about the atmosphere at the Stonex. People. Obviously, I can only talk about the area that I sit in the East Stand, but people are engaged in the game. They react to the game. They're not up and down every 5 minutes for a beer or a sausage roll or whatever. And yeah, I mean, we make our own little bit of noise. That does help that we've got the white helmet fella in our row and in our section as well, and he gets us going. But yeah, there's not a problem with the atmosphere at the Stonex, and there's not a problem with them playing music to my mind either. The one thing I did notice, though, watching the Sale game back on the TV, is that music is exceptionally loud. Even comes across on the TNT comms, which must be driving them around the twist. But it's good to hear that the sales for the showdown are ahead of where they were last season. Slightly more disappointing news on season tickets, but I guess it is a hard sell in an ever more expensive world at the moment, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. And I mean, it's like, I'll hold my hand up. I don't have a season ticket. I watch most of the games on the television. It's as much to do with the fact that I'm 100 miles up the road in Banbury. I mean, the fact that it's easier for me to go to Gloucester or Northampton or Leicester than it is to Saracens is one of those things. And I know my mum and dad are giving up their season ticket because, they're getting older and everything. They went yesterday and they spent, because of accidents on the M25 and everything, which is out of the control of Saracens, obviously, but, they spent 5 hours sat in a car going to and from the game. So, those sort of like pressures. And I mean, when I add in how much it's going to cost in fuel and then how much it's, we've got to make sure the dogs are, there are a lot of reasons why we don't go. But you're right, it is a hard sell. And in an area like North London, there is so much going on. And it's not just football that you're up against as well. You're 20 minutes on the tube from the centre of London. So West End shows or whatever are going on. It's rock concerts, whatever. People have only got a finite amount of money. And, what Saracens have got to do, and what I think they are doing, is trying to prove what the value for money is. And, the fact that they do sell tickets that are really, really expensive for Duncan and his 2 jets to go along to or whatever, does it then allow people to buy tickets at 20 quid on the, where I could turn around and say, well, 4 or 5 games a season, I'm going to go and I can pay 23 quid for a ticket and stand if I want to or whatever. It makes it viable for those more casual supporters. But when you do go, and this is what I say, you can get a horse to water, can't you? But getting a pair of swimming trunks is a different matter. And, once you've got people there, and I think we said it on our WhatsApp group, every year, the value for money, not just what goes on the pitch, but, the franchises, the merchandising, the stalls. And I expect we'll talk about merchandising in a minute in regards to shirts, where there is a bit of criticism, justifiable criticism, I think, that perhaps the club needs to listen to. But, the fact that there's lots of kids to do, there's not, there's the Oasis, there's this, there's that, there's the other. It is actually good value for money once you get there. Just, if you're traveling 100 miles there and 100 miles back, there's less value for money.
Yeah, they're definitely trying to add value where they can, which is reasonable. I won't say no cost to the Saracens, because there is obviously some costs involved, but it's a reasonable cost, and it's things that they can do relatively easily to add value to people coming along, both on a season ticket basis like myself, or on a match by match, and more power to them. You did mention there the merchandise, so we'll have a quick chat about that. I mean, I think I've said this before, that really a shirt shouldn't be changed, or they certainly shouldn't be changing both shirts every season. I think that is a bit of an imposition. But to be honest with you, I'm not going to buy one this season, and I don't think I'm alone in that from chatting to people that I know at games. But yeah, I mean, our Sam has not been overly impressed with the quality of what he saw yesterday. That was for certain.
Well, I suppose it's the horse to water question, isn't it? And the fact of the matter is, if 10,000 people go to the game and 10,000 people buy a shirt, that's £75 a pop. That's an awful lot of spondulics. But also you can't have 10,000 people queuing up in the shop on the one day it's open on match day to get their shirt. And there's a few things there that perhaps I think the club needs to revisit and look at. And, I haven't got the shirt yet. I probably will buy the shirt next time I'm at the ground. But, I'm hearing the quality isn't fantastic. Maybe that's because everything's been handed over to Castore or whatever. Maybe things out of control of the club or anything like that. But, if you're charging £75 and you expect 10,000 people to buy it at £75, it's got to be bloody good value for money. If that means you're making £20 a shirt as opposed to £30 a shirt, well, so be it.
You've got to imagine that most of these shirts are made, not just Saracens and certainly not just Castore, but you've got to imagine that the actual production costs of these things are quite cheap. But yeah, there's possibly a little bit more work for the club to do there. I do understand why they've outsourced it, as it were. I think commercially it probably makes sense for Saracens, and yeah, that's just one of those things we're going to have to live with.
Hi, this is Petrus Duplessis, and you are listening to the Fezcast.
This is the Fezcast.
Yeah, so we also need to catch up with Saracens around and out on loan and what have you, and dual registrations, and a fantastic 31 points to 29 win for Ampthill this weekend just gone, featuring 11 Saracens players in their starting lineup, as well as Baz Barrington, and in fact, all the points were scored by Saracens players, or certainly all the tries. Angus Hall with a couple, Max Eakey with one, Josh Hallett and Brandon Jackson, the other try scorers. So well done to them. We look forward to seeing them again at the Stonex soon. No women's game this week. They had a rest week in between the Power Up series and the start of the Premiership, which is coming up this weekend with Saracens at home to Ealing Trailfinders on the Saturday. And on the subject of the women's game, we're now joined by Matt, who will take us through the WXV series results so far and a little preview of the Saracens Alliance Premiership Challenge. And in doing so, he's joined by Saracens scrum half Tori Sellors.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Hi, Alex Osterbury here, Director of Rugby for Saracens Women. You're listening to the Saracens Fezcast.
This is the Fezcast.
Well, welcome to the last part of this week's show. We're going to cover off some of the women's rugby that's happened over the course of the last weekend and the last couple of weeks as well. And with me to help do that is Tori Sellors. Tori, how are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. You okay?
Yes, excellent. Yeah, bit rushed, but aren't we all? It's the way we do these podcasts. So before we talk about you, we'll talk about the international games that have happened, because it's been a pretty interesting weekend in the WXV tournament. I've seen the England game and a few scores, but other than that, fairly limited, to be honest. But actually, let's pick up on probably the biggest scoreline of the weekend, which was the New Zealand-Ireland game. Did you watch the game, or did you just see the end of it? It was pretty early in the morning.
Caught a few of the highlights of it, but it's really exciting for Ireland to obviously be in that position to take on New Zealand and be very competitive within WXV. So it'll be an interesting World Cup coming up.
Absolutely, yeah. And given Ireland lost, I think, by 80 points the last time they played New Zealand, it's a pretty big turnaround, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. But there's a bit of Saracens' interest elsewhere in the tournament. Lots of Canadian players, a few in the Scotland team, and a few in the Wales team as well. Actually, I'm going to pick up on one highlight that I saw from the Scotland game, which was try for Corinne Grant, and now a few people might not have seen it, so we can claim that it was a mazy run from the halfway line, but actually it was a case of just catching the ball and flopping over the line. But reasonable game for the Scotland girls, wasn't it? Yeah,
it's really exciting to see all the Sarries girls in their international shirts and earning a place and getting more experience in those positions.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the England game, because it was. Given the scoreline, actually, there were points of the game where I was possibly a little bit disappointed. Is the wrong word, but I think the England players could have felt that maybe they could have got ahead a little bit earlier, and certainly the USA gave them quite a run for their money at times, didn't they?
Yeah, I think you get a bit nervous when you saw the scoreline in the first half, and it wasn't as big as England would normally dominate. So, but it's all about being competitive these days, and USA have obviously done their homework, so it's nice to see that the games are competitive and a bit of rugby.
Anyone stand out for you in that match?
I think Ellie Kildan, obviously, with that try that's all over social media, is very exciting. But Zoe, I think she had a great game. Obviously, being at Saracens as well and being that key distributor, it's great to see her up on that stage.
Yeah, she's had a rough time of it with injuries and things. Yeah, definitely good to see her. Yeah. I thought it was Bo Westcombe-Evans making her debut on the wing looked pretty bright, and there was the usual Jess Breach sort of mazy run try as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, as they say.
Absolutely, yeah. So. Predictions for the rest of that tournament. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, we can both sit here and say we think England are going to win the whole thing, but what are your thoughts?
I'm looking forward to seeing how Canada are going to do. They seem to have a really exciting game against France, so it'll be interesting to see how they shape up, especially against England. Obviously, New Zealand haven't had the best of starts. With their warm-up game against England wasn't the best, but obviously against Ireland was rather competitive, so it'll be interesting to see how they turn out within the tournament, and France as well. So yeah,
absolutely, it seems fair. Yeah, and Canada playing pretty exciting rugby now. Ella Viervas is part of that England setup, which from our side we assume that means you're going to see some game time over the next few weeks. But we'll get to that shortly. It's halfway into our recording already. We'll actually get you to introduce yourself properly to our audience. So, Tori, just give our listeners a bit of a lowdown of how you got into rugby and how you found yourself at Saracens, because it is a bit of a bounce around between clubs.
Yeah, definitely not your usual story to end up at Saracens. But I started rugby when I was 6, playing at Sevenoaks in Kent, so relatively local. And then when I was 16, left home and for Hartbury, and then found myself working my way through the pathway with the England under-18s and England under-20s before looking at university options and Prem clubs around, and made the decision to go to Worcester Warriors. So spent 2 seasons there before, obviously, we all know what happened and the unexpected turbulence of that. So were looking for a club, Saracens came to my rescue, and took the opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not going to get you to talk about everything that did happen at Worcester, because that is a bit unfair. But obviously, from our side, we benefited massively from having yourself at the club, and Akina and Paige Farries as well. Very glad to see you with us. But you've sort of had to be a little bit patient for game time so far. I mean, last season, obviously competing with Ella and with Leanne Infante and a couple of others at the club as well for game time, and a few appearances off the bench mainly. But how have you found your time at Saracens so far? Are you enjoying it, seeing yourself developing as a player as well?
Yeah, definitely seen some individual development and growth within my own game. I think when you surround yourself with the caliber of players that are at Saracens, you're going to grow, whether that's on the pitch or in the training environment as well. So there's all those sorts of aspects, and the working with Ella and Leanne with those skills 9 bits is also like learning off each other as well and developing my tactical side of the game. It's not all technical, and I think sometimes you forget that. And obviously with those experiences and exposures off the bench and in the cup period, I did see some game time, so that's also quite good.
Absolutely. And speaking of the cup game, it's a bit of a strange season, this one, isn't it? Because we're really squeezed into between now and February with the World Cup coming around the corner. But it does mean that with other internationals on, there is a bit of game time for the wider squad. And you've had those 2 early season cup games, which ended in pretty handy wins eventually. And you started at 9 in both of those matches. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it to either of them, even though I planned to be at both of them. So I've only seen brief highlights. But those 2 games against Quins and Trailfinders, how did you feel in yourself and as a squad that they went and prepared you for the rest of the season?
I think it gave us an opportunity to try some new things and get a lot of learnings from it. So you could see where we progressed from the Quins game to the Ealing game with our own internal goals and what we wanted to improve game on game before obviously hitting this season with the Prem on Saturday. So it was nice to get up those warm-up fixtures and obviously play a bit of rugby, because a lot of us haven't played rugby in a while. So it was nice to actually get your body ready and physically fit before obviously going into the Prem.
That's fair. And does the sort of process of getting ready for the season change, knowing the fact that it's all so shortened into a spell of 4 months? Because last season almost seemed like it was in, well, I was going to say 2 halves, but it was almost in thirds, really, big gaps between fixtures and things, whereas this one is a bit tighter. Does that change at all?
Yeah, I think with the season so condensed, you definitely have to be quite robust. You can't afford to pick up injuries and stuff. So getting you really contact ready and pushing the threshold of training beyond what you will then compete at in a game is really important, so that we don't get those injuries when we do go into these game scenarios. It isn't new to us. It's almost second nature, and we aren't struggling there. So
now I'm making the bold assumption that you're going to see a fair bit of game time, certainly over the next few weeks, and don't tell me whether I'm right or wrong, because we're not allowed to do that just yet. But going into the start of the season, we've got a run of fixtures coming up, a repeat match against Trailfinders. How are you hoping to take your opportunity in the team there? Are you looking at seeing it as a development opportunity over the next few weeks, or are you looking at the season as a whole, wanting to start every match?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's as a team we want to win every game. So we want to get to that final at the end of the day. So it's whatever we can do best as a team to prepare ourselves for that final. I mean, we want to be winning every game. We want to be bettering ourselves so that we can become a better team and gel better. So that's the most important thing, is getting to that final at the end of it all, as well as building from our learnings and throughout the games.
Now, a question I quite often ask players when we talk to them, I want you to try and be as selfish as you possibly can, because normally we do get that exact answer about, it's about the team and wanting to make the final and things. What do you want out of your rugby career in the next 2 or 3 years? Do you want to be England's new number 9 within 2 years? Do you want to be winning every trophy? Be completely selfish about where you want your journey to go?
I'd quite like to see myself in an England shirt in the next few years. Obviously, competing nationally, like with your own country on your chest, is an honour. So to continue through that would be somewhere where I'd aspire to be, but also enjoying it. For me, like having enjoyment in the game is the most important thing, because it makes you want to be better and makes you want to continue that drive and to have the aspirations of playing for my club and my country. So just enjoying it is the most important thing for me. And then with those aspirations of playing for my country.
Can't really argue with that, to be honest. It's absolutely fair. Now, just one more question about pre-season. Obviously, it is with internationals on, players having jobs in various places that take them away from training and things. How difficult is it to sort of get a bit of momentum in pre-season when people are dipping in and out, or they're potentially off with their country? Is it something you find happens where you're almost seeing different faces each week in training, or is there actually a very good process running forward that keeps you all moving together?
Yeah, I'd love to say that there is a bit of consistency, but also you've got to be adaptable. I think in a game, you've got to be adaptable to whatever scenario is happening. If somebody's got to go off for HIA and somebody else is being replaced, there's always going to be scenarios, whether that's in training where somebody new's turned up or somebody hasn't quite got the call for camp again. So seeing them again and them interact. But I think having the knowledge of players from last season and being involved with them previously, it hasn't been an issue with the fluctuation of in and out kind of thing. But we've also had a relatively consistent squad for these up games. There's not been a lot of movement, so it's been quite nice. And I think we've gelled well as a team through a tough pre-season. We've had to come together, and we are one club and we are one team.
Well, actually, I suppose I said I wasn't going to mention the side of things at Worcester too much, but actually, that is a very good point that you've had probably for yourself a bit more of a solid, consistent pre-season compared to last year.
Yeah.
How have you found it? The start of this season different and easier than coming into the club sort of partway into last season? Or?
I think going through pre-season this year has definitely been. It's set me up a little bit better, and what the calls are, the most simple of things, if you're going mid-season and somebody's shouting at you something and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but that you kind of get to grips very quickly. But obviously going through pre-season, you're with them through a journey and you're through that journey together, so you make decisions together, and there's a bit more of that rather than coming in, jumping straight into something, thrown in the deep end. So yeah.
That's fair enough. Well, Tori, we're looking forward to seeing how the season goes for him. First match on Saturday against Ealing at 2:00, I believe. I am actually about to purchase my ticket. It's sitting in my shopping list at the moment. So that'll be in and ready. I can finally get to a game, having promised to be at the last two. But Tori, is there anything you would like to say to our listeners while you're sitting here before we leave everyone for this week?
Come down this Saturday and watch a good bit of rugby, hey?
Can't say fairer than that. We'll all be doing that. But yeah, Tori, thank you very much for joining us and running over the start of the season. And looking forward to seeing you hopefully on the pitch at the weekend.
Yeah.
This is the Fezcast.
Well, thank you for those of you who made it this far through. That's probably one of the longest shows we'll be doing this season. Jez, thank you very much for your time and keeping me on the straight and narrow just about. It's been fun to do. It's slightly nerve-wracking being in charge and looking at all the shiny buttons on the mixing desk in front of me. There isn't really a mixing desk. We're nowhere near that professional. But Jez, I think it's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it. And it's nice after 5 seasons, one, to have a week off and not to have heard myself and Matt droning on as we often do, to heard a different perspective last week. And I will say Duncan and James did a fantastic job, I felt. And again, nice of Duncan and Sam to take over the interviewing duties with Mark Thompson. I've interviewed Mark a couple of times now. So, yeah, it's good to get a different angle of attack. I mean, there is an element of was I good cop and them two bad cop. I mean, the listeners made their mind up on that one. But yeah, and yourself, Barry, great job in anchoring. I said anchoring this week's episode, and long may it continue. It does get easier, Barry. It really does get easier, as you could probably tell from the effort that myself and Matt put into it after 5 seasons.
You've set the standard, and I think I probably just tripped over the bar or possibly under it. I'm not too sure there. But anyway, it has been great fun, and I look forward to hopefully being able to do it again at some point in the future. But that's it for this week. So thanks again to Jez, and we'll be back with episode 7 on should be the 9th of October. Hopefully with a preview of the Quins game to come up the following weekend, and a look back at hopefully another win at the Stonex at this weekend.
Yeah, and hopefully a chat with the Quins guys, unlike Exeter Chiefs. I mean, you were very polite about it, weren't you? That we know what they're really like, don't we?
Well, yeah, it's hard when they're talking to their wife and their sister, and it's just the one woman. But there we go.
Yeah, I guess it's having webbed hands that doesn't help them press the buttons, does it? But there we go.
We should probably stop before we get raided by the Obscene Publications Squad or something. But thanks again for listening, folks, and we'll see you on the next one.
Ta-ra.
This is the Fezcast.